and welcome. I'm Katie Yates, Public Relations Specialist at Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Today we will be talking about deer hunting gear. We'll be reviewing some of the ways tech can help enhance your hunting experience, the bare essentials for success, and adaptations you can make to fit your needs. We will be answering questions, and so if you are home watching, you can type them into the comment box, and we'll go over them at the end of the discussion. I'm joined today by 3 MDIFW staff members and avid deer hunters, Wildlife Special Projects Coordinator Bob Cordes, Wildlife Biologist Kendall Martin, and Media and Graphics Supervisor Courtney Moulton. So thanks for joining us today. Keep in mind this stream is recorded so you can access it anytime from the department's YouTube channel. Let's just get started with Bob. What are some essential clothing for deer hunting?
Well, certainly I'm a gear junkie, and as people will find out as we go through this today, so I get a little bit of everything, but basically you just need some warm clothes, a weapon, firearm, if you're firearms hunting, and a knife. Pretty essential. Good boots. Certainly there's more advances to clothes, camouflage, and hunter orange. You just, during the firearm season on deer, just need to make sure you have your two requirements for fluorescent orange or hunter orange. That's a solid hat, and then a garment of clothing that covers your torso. And you can get pretty cheap fluorescent vests at Walmart, Tractor Supply. How about Kendall? Got anything to add? You're muted.
I'll jump in. I guess start with my my kind of lessons learned from growing up in Waldo County, and pretty much hunted all the time in leather uninsulated boots and blue jeans and an orange hoodie. So that was not the most comfortable thing. I was, successful in doing so for a lot of years, but I've certainly learned to appreciate, good long johns out of wool or polypropylene, and good heavy wool stockings and a nice pair of boots, and then certainly good leathering. One thing that was kind of drove hard into my head growing up too, besides obviously having your mandatory hunter orange, was to avoid wearing white. And of course, anything that's more of a tan brown, just for safety reasons. I typically now try to avoid blue collar clothing, which I think we can go into a little bit more later, but really trying to keep it simple. Nothing too fancy. Even to this day, I only own two items of camouflage. So I don't go really too deep into clothing options, just as long as I'm comfortable and warm.
Same here. And so probably, one of our biggest growing segments to our hunting population is the female segment. And so I guess I would throw it to Courtney too, to see what kind of challenges you face for hunting gear. I know it's come a long way, but still pretty limited.
So I'm also very basic in what I wear when I go hunting. I own one camouflage jacket and one pair of pants, and really I just layer accordingly underneath. I like a wicking first layer and then some fleece, and it definitely changes depending on the day. And then as we get farther into November, I definitely layer up more. There are definitely less options when you go hunting for females compared to male clothing, but you can definitely find something. I've had good luck at Dick's. Just because that's closest to me in either Bangor or Augusta, and have gotten what I needed. And then also for my underlayers, I typically don't wear like a hunting brand, because I wear the same stuff whether I'm ice fishing or skiing or just hiking in colder weather. So I'm not always looking for hunting specific clothes. There are less options, but you don't need anything fancy. As long as you get a couple main pieces, you're good to go. And we've also talked that if you don't have camo even for your first year and you just want to start off with some darker clothing, that also works, and you don't always need the camo. I do have a female specific safety harness for when I'm in my tree stands. I am glad that I have a female version of that, because it definitely sits a little differently than a male's safety harness. My other big tip is, once you do find your gear, make sure that you practice shooting with your gear on, because it is going to be a little different depending on how thick your gear is, and the material may act a little differently as you're sliding your gun across. I definitely like gloves. And then my favorite pair of shoes are muck boots, and I just change my socks accordingly. depending on the temperature that day. You'll also want to make sure that your skin is all covered for tick safety, and we'll go into a little bit more with that.
Yeah, Courtney, I'll jump in. I think that was a really great point to remember that, you probably already have, most people probably already have warm clothing, so you don't really need anything special to get out there. If you're not used to being outdoors in the late fall or winter, then you certainly want to get something new to keep warm. But other than that, it's really not too complicated.
So actually, Courtney, what you had said about tick safety made me think in last week's panel, a question came up about whether or not deer can smell permethrin or sense permethrin. And while the panelists weren't exactly sure whether or not they could, we all agreed that it was important, that tick safety was important enough where you would wear permethrin and it didn't seem to affect the hunt. But one of the panelists, Crystal, also brought up that she has sort of this ritual where she stores her hunting clothes with pine boughs to mask any scents that she might have or any that deer might pick up. So I'm curious, Bob and Kendall, what are some of your, I guess I don't know if we would call them rituals for getting ready for the hunt?
Yeah, I can start and talk about permethrin a little bit, I guess. So, I think certainly deer have an outstanding sense of smell, but permethrin is a chemical that you spray on your clothes and let it dry before you wear it. It's not something you'd want to put directly on your skin or spray on your clothes the morning before. So it has a chance to dry and air dry. And so I think that strong chemical odor would be gone. And personally, I think tick safety is more of an issue for me than scent. But, for me, playing the wind is more important than scent control, but I will have scent spray and I'll spray down my boots and I'll wash my clothes in scent free soap. But that's more, and Kendall can go into this a little more, but that's more of for your optical brightener. So anything with phosphorus in it will shine pretty brightly and is pretty visible in the deer's visual spectrum. And so that's more important there, just to and it doesn't have to be fancy stuff. I use dead downwind, but that's not necessary. There's all kinds of products out there, and just like all has a free and clear soap that doesn't have those brighteners, and that's good enough. I think the key is, if you're wearing your hunting clothes, don't fill up your gas tank the morning wearing them. Don't be cooking breakfast and cooking bacon in your hunting camp and then go out, because that stuff will linger on. That's my basic.
Yeah, I when you say ritual, I always think of what do I eat in the morning, and that's my basic ritual, starting from way early memories going out with my father, and he'd always warm a chocolate donut up in the microwave before we headed out. But I'm a big fan of bacon too, so I just typically try to leave my clothes out in the garage or at least out of the kitchen area, and then for a few weeks prior to the season, like you mentioned, just switch over if we happen to be using any laundry detergent that's got an odor to it, something free and clear, because that eliminates a lot of fragrant scents, as well as double check the label just to make sure there's no optical brighteners. Mostly phosphorus was banned a few years ago, so you're not going to see that, but there's a lot of variable options the company use, but those really enhance blues, and this is something that goes back hundreds of years. The blues actually make clothes look whiter and brighter, so and those are the wavelengths that deer see, so we really try to avoid those and have more muted earth tone colors that aren't enhanced at all. So it helps you blend in, and that kind of really helps mask you, because really movement is something that deer see, and so that you can wear about any clothes that you want to, as long as you're not moving too much. So I think that's probably really a good tactic to use, because whether you're using sitting in a tree stand or a blind or just still hunting, trying to keep as quiet and hidden as you can is probably the best tactic.
Thanks, Kendall. I actually think that leads really well into my next question, which is about ground blinds and tree stands. What are some things folks should keep in mind? And does someone need to use a ground blind or tree stand to hunt deer successfully?
Yeah, good question. I guess for starters, for those that maybe don't know, but there are some different options when it comes to stands or blinds. And blinds are just basically something to hide in and obscure your movement. So It's pretty easy to gather up a bunch of down limbs or logs and make your own little blind, or buy a portable pop-up one. When it comes to stands, you have ladder stands, which are just what they sound like, climbers or hanging stands. And the climbers are made so that you can use the stand itself to climb up the tree. You need a fairly specific tree that's straight with no limbs. The hanging stands require some sort of steps to get you up to the height that you desire. So whether it be strap-on steps or some other method, they're all pretty useful tools, but they're certainly not necessary. I prefer hanging stands myself because they're a little more mobile, easier to lug around than, like, say, a ladder stand. And I can move it if I need to at any time during the season, or sneak into a place and put it up and hunt that day. But I also don't like to sit that long because I get bored and cramped up. So I like to get down and still hunt a lot. So certainly spent a lot of years with no stands and just sneaking around through the woods and using natural vegetation for cover and trying to sit still and be quiet as possible, for sure. I don't know if Bob or Courtney use stands much, but like I said, hangings are my preference.
Yeah, I use hanging stands a lot. I started using, or I used the climber quite a bit last year. You definitely want to practice with your climbing tree stand well in advance, just so you're a lot more quiet and you're a lot more safe with that practice. Another thing I like to think of to the gear question is when you select your gloves, you want to make sure they have grips on them, because otherwise you're not going to be wanting to climb up maybe a metal ladder with your slippery gloves. So definitely make sure those have grips on them. Otherwise, you're going to have to take them off. Your hands are going to get pretty cold holding onto the metal. And then, of course, for safety, just make sure that you always have 3 points of contact as you're going up the ladder. I also have a gun hoist, so I don't have to carry the gun on my back while I'm climbing up the ladder. And so that's just a string that hangs from the top. I leave it up there all year long. And I'm able to just, once I'm safely in my tree stand, haul up my gun with that string. And then I also have a safety rope at each of my tree stands. And then I have one harness. So I have one harness that clips into, no matter, I use three different tree stands. So I have this rope at each one, and I can just clip into it. And that's my harness is actually really comfortable. So don't be afraid of getting a harness. It definitely makes you feel a lot more secure.
Yeah, Courtney, those gun hoists are really helpful, and especially for bow hunting. And sometimes people don't use them and use just a sling. And you're gonna kind of want to remember to be extra safe to unload your gun before you're climbing up, whether you're using a hoist or a sling, either one.
Great, thank you. I actually think this might be a good time to turn to Bob, and I'm going to ask about, or we can talk about method of harvest. Bob, what are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I'm gonna just back up a little bit and just reinforce what Courtney talked about with safety in the tree stand. It is really important to wear a harness no matter what height you go through. That's where we see a lot of our common injuries during firearm season or hunting season is tree stand falls. And so that safety harness is an important feature. And also, if you're choosing to use blinds or tree stands, if you're going to leave them on the landscape, they do require landowner permission. So just something to keep in mind. And then I just have a little visual here. So when I'm hunting a new spot, I just have this little thing that I can carry along with me. It goes right on my backpack, and you can strap it to a tree, and it just provides you a nice place to sit. Certainly you can find a stump, but pretty nice little thing. As I said before, I'm a gear junkie, so. But yeah, I mean, certainly the different methods, people out there for choosing to use firearms definitely need to practice. And so we have some different places. Fish and game clubs often allow the public to come and use the facilities, have a couple open days right before deer season. They let you sight in your gun. Even if you've got it sighted in year to year, and it's important to just make sure that scope wasn't knocked off during the off season, and just get out there and send a couple rounds down range. But then we have some state facilities, one at Summer Haven in Augusta, and then we have a facility over at Freiburg as well that are open for that. And I would say that with any of your equipment, whether it's firearms, crossbows, or vertical bows as well. I don't know, Courtney, did you You had talked earlier about making sure you wear your clothes. Do you want to talk about that again?
Yeah, I always like to, when I'm sighting in my rifle, kind of wearing the clothes that I'm going to be wearing while I'm actually hunting. It's just a totally different feel because sometimes when you're target practicing, you might be doing it in September or August when it's a lot warmer out. You're wearing something that's much thinner. And so being able to practice with your hunting jacket, with your hunting hat too, I definitely use my hat as a way of kind of um, figuring out where I'm most comfortable holding my gun. So I wear my hat, I wear my boots. And then also, I don't do this anymore, but when I was starting to hunt, I would bring my gun unloaded, of course, in advance of the season, and I would practice shooting from different places I was going to be. So I brought it into my tree stand and kind of practice, okay, I think the deer are likely to cross here, or I think they might come out here. And I'd practice aiming in that direction just to get more comfortable with my weapon. That way, on the day of your actual hunt, you're going to be a little more quicker, you're going to be quieter, you're going to be more confident, and you're going to know if you're ready and you can take that shot. You're going to be a lot more confident that you've had that practice. So that's definitely one of my keys, especially for success, especially if you're beginning. And it's a lot different. If you're just shooting in a field, it's a lot different than having to hoist your gun up in a little confined area and maybe a little blind spot you've set up or from a tree stand.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Courtney. I mean, I got a new rifle a couple of years ago, and even now, just to feel comfortable with that, I'll practice before I go out, obviously unloaded and keeping gun safety in mind, but making sure I'm comfortable with the mechanism, and then also shouldering the gun and trying to find aiming points while I'm sitting in the stand. And so just sort of sounds foolish, but and maybe look a little foolish if somebody was watching, but just kind of going through the motions to make it secondhand. Is muscle memory really helps you, because that way, when the time comes that you're actually trying to actually make something happen, you're not second guessing yourself and thinking about 8 million other things. So just being real comfortable with your equipment is really helpful.
I think what we've been hearing from all three of us is just talking about how important confidence is. And if you're confident for your weapon, you're more likely to have a quick, ethical kill, and you're going to be a lot more satisfied with your harvest because you were confident. And it's going to be a more enjoyable experience for you. So definitely practicing with your gear, practicing in your location, being confident. I definitely am a huge advocate for making sure that the caliber you choose is something you're comfortable with. I'm not someone who says you need to have the highest caliber possible. I think being comfortable and confident in what you select, and even if it's a shorter gun or you have a youth model, that way it's depending on your height, whatever you're confident in is going to be the best weapon of choice for you. I personally really like to hunt with a 7mm 08 or 243, but I've also heard from other females that they really like the 44 Ruger Magnum. So those are some options out there.
I've definitely heard from other hunters and our staff here that you really need to make the firearm an extension of yourself. So something you feel very comfortable with, very confident with, and that will just increase the likelihood that you'll be safe with it. So actually that kind of leads into a conversation that I think it's important that we have. Bob, do you want to talk a bit about ammo options and non-lead?
Sure. Unfortunately, I think that your choice should have been made previously. We were going through a little bit of an ammo shortage out there, but yeah, we there's a whole lot of availability out there of non-lead, and so certainly some health issues, some human health issues, particularly with kids under 6 when it comes to lead consumption, and then some issues with wildlife health as well. Having some lead on the landscape, particularly birds are vulnerable to lead, specifically vulnerable to lead. And so, they've come a long way. And so let's see if I can get it here. So these are 2 308 casings, and one is a leaded option. One is an all copper load here. And they look pretty similar. And so for years, ammo companies have been trying to make ammunition that it hits harder and penetrates deeper, and they have these ballistic tips, and so the lead and the non-lead they're pretty similar. So if you're buying premium ammunition, they're pretty similar in price if you can find them these days.
Yeah, Bob, I will say, somebody who was kind of hard to bring along on the non-lead boat, it is pretty helpful, especially now having a young child. Makes me think about it a little more. They generally behave pretty similar, but because there are slight differences in ballistics, you might think about not going with the same grain bullet as you would in lead, because the way that they expand differently. And so try a few different bullets before you settle on just one or dismiss it. So there's plenty of options out there now, like you said, unlike just 5 years ago. So do a little research and pick one that you think might work well with your firearm and try it out.
Yeah, and just to add to that a little more too is, I've experienced that with lead prior to switching over to non-lead. Is some rifles or some guns handle different manufacturers or different bullet types differently, and so just to back that up, you do that whether you're doing lead, switching to a different lead bullet, or going non-lead as well. And then talking back about practice, if you make that decision to go non-lead, certainly you don't want to waste all that lead ammunition you bought, or if you have some on hand, certainly those, if you have pretty similar grain type, using those at the range to practice is pretty effective.
Thanks, everyone. So we'll be switching gears a little bit here. Kendall, when you're out in the field, what are some must-have navigation and survival tools that you use?
Well, obviously in the hunter safety, we're going to push pretty hard that people have a survival kit. I tend to carry my survival kit spread across my body, so a lighter or a match is in a pocket somewhere, and another pocket might have a good sharp knife. And to me, it's really critical, to have a little saw on that pocket knife, because it makes it easy to trim limbs if I have permission to do so while I'm sitting in a tree stand. Sometimes helpful for dressing a deer as well. I always have a compass, and that's even if I'm a couple hundred yards from the house, just because sometimes tracking a deer after dark on a cloudy night, you can get pretty turned around. If somebody tells you they've never been lost, they've never really spent much time in the woods, or they like to use different phrases like geographically confused. But headlamps pretty handy to stick in a pocket as well. GPSs nowadays can be handy because they help you scouting and remembering things you don't know about later. But generally pretty simple with my ammunition, my rifle, warm clothes, maybe a snack, and the knife and whatnot. But there are some other gadgets that can be fun to play with as well too. But maybe Bob's got some ideas, being such a gadget guy.
I got plenty of ideas for gadgets, but I'll let Courtney add her opinion first.
Yeah, Kendall definitely hit most of the items I would talk about. I think definitely flashlight, compass, and knife. I do kind of hunt in a smaller area, so I don't bring a huge survival kit, but I definitely always have water and some snacks. Another thing, sticking to my point about the safety harness, is say if you do fall out of your tree stand, you're now hanging in that safety harness, making sure that the key pieces or key equipment that you need to get out safely are available to you. So you're not going to want to store your knife or your phone where that harness is going to cinch up, and you're not going to be able to get into those pockets. So making sure those are still accessible if you do end up falling out of the stand. So I definitely try to keep my phone and a knife in an easy to grab area if I do need that.
Yeah, and for me, I even though I'm a gadget junkie and gear junkie, I just keep it pretty simple. And especially if, like Courtney said, if I'm hunting near the house, it's a headlamp and knife and some water and maybe a granola bar. But if I'm going to the North Woods, I'm going to make sure that I have a way to start a fire, maybe a backup. There's saying 2 is 1 and 1 is none. And so if you're out in the woods and you're tracking a deer late at night and you have one flashlight with no backup batteries and the batteries go dead, you may have a hard time getting your way out of the woods. So having at least spare batteries, if not a backup flashlight, is pretty helpful and a way to start a fire and keep warm. Little space blankets are pretty cheap and pretty easy to put in your pack.
Yeah, I'd second that, Bob. We tend to think about in southern and central Maine, pretty easy access to getting back out on the road. But if you're in the bigger woods or even somewhere in another state, you want to really carry a backpack and have a little bit more than, say your granola bar, because you do have to spend the night in the woods. But, for me, having a flashlight and the spare battery is pretty helpful. Excuse me, one thing to remember is that try to keep your phone or batteries away from your compass, because that can at times reverse the polarity and confuse people a little bit. So I'm always pretty conscious of keeping my compass in one place and batteries or anything with a battery in another pocket.
Yeah, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to be safe and prepared when going into the woods, and letting people know where you're going, informing at least 1 or 2 people where you're headed, what your plan is, when they can expect you back. Those types of safety nets and precautions can keep you safe. So kind of switching gears, question for all of you. Once you're in the field, do you use any lures or calls? Bob, why don't you start?
Sure. I always take them. And every time I go into a sporting goods store and something new and shiny looks at me, I think I got to try the newest and latest. But the reality is, I may take a grunt tube or a bleat can, but I'm not convinced in my 35 years of deer hunting that it's ever worked on more than 1 or 2 occasions for me. So it just gives me something to do, pass the time, and if it works, it works. But I don't rely on them a whole lot. I rely more on my preseason scouting and knowing I'm in a good area to encounter deer than try to affect them with a call or a lure.
Yeah, I think I'm with you, Bob. Is location, location, location. But excuse me, I do like to carry that ground tube, because I think, especially still hunting, it's helpful sometimes to cover my noise a little bit and make the deer think that it might be another deer and give me an extra second or two.
And then for me, I really like, you can get this at basically any gas station that sells kind of sporting equipment, but it probably costs like $5, but it's a doe bleat can. All you do is go like this. And so super easy to use, super cheap, and doesn't take up much space. And I definitely have used it a lot more times hunting and not had anything come out, but I have used it a couple of times when deer have come out. A perfect example was my buck I harvested this year or last year. Crossed way down the field. All I saw was definitely on the run. I just saw a white flash, and I used that a couple times. About a minute later, and he came right back in front of me. So I'd like to think that I called him back in after he was kind of jumped or whatever was chasing him across the field, but it came in lucky there. Another thing I have used synthetic deer urine lures, and you're definitely going to want to make sure it's synthetic to help prevent CWD coming into Maine. And I know Bob was going to talk a little bit more about chronic wasting disease.
Yeah, sure. We definitely have some importation rules, and we have nothing in rule now, just some recommendations against urine-based lures. But a lot of those urine-based lures are manufactured at a handful of captive deer facilities, and so when chronic wasting disease is present, it's a mutated form of protein called a prion, and those are shed through saliva and urine and other bodily fluids. And so when you're collecting that urine, there's definitely a chance for that to be transmitted. It's not been shown to have a direct correlation, but there is a significant risk with that. Anything you want to add, Kendall?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a big risk, and it may be helpful to, excuse me, to maybe grab some gland lure from somebody that harvested the deer locally, like a friend or something like that. So you're using natural lures, if you are, that are local to the area, and maybe not spreading any chance for CWD to move around the landscape.
Thank you, everyone. So I will get into this next question here, which I think we're going to spend a little bit of time on. So before we get into it, I just want to remind everyone watching at home that you can type in your questions and we will answer them at the end of our conversation today. So if you have anything that we're talking about now that you want to ask about, go ahead and type it into the comments and we'll get to it later. So Bob and Kendall, I know that you both have very different philosophies when it comes to gear. What are some of your must-haves?
I'll go first because Bob might take a while. One of my guilty pleasures is hand warmers now. I used to be accused of being pretty frugal and stubborn, but since I used to buy them for my wife for stocking, I started stealing them, so now I got to buy twice as much. It does make it more comfortable when it's really cold out and you're sitting in the tree stand. Other than that, it's probably trail cameras, because they sort of extend the hunting season for me, and they help in scouting. But it's just as much fun to see what's out there even throughout the summer and other times of the year. So those are probably, you know, my two things, other than the things we've already talked about that are pretty critical, like compasses and whatnot.
Yeah, and like Kendall said, and I've said, that I am a gear junkie. So anything shiny in the store that I think I gotta have, I gotta try out. But in the end, the reality is, when it comes to hunting, most of the time I just grab my weapon of choice, you know, my bow or my gun, and make sure I got my legal orange on, and a knife most of the time if I'm hunting near my house. Sometimes I forget that and easy walk back home. But you know, so Kendall said hand warmers, and so I have one of these hand muffs. I don't even know if they make this brand anymore, Icebreaker. It's got some use here, but man, if my feet and my hands are cold, that will end my hunt quick. So you can get these things for about 25-30 bucks, and they're a lifesaver. You can stick your hands in there and not even need gloves, or wear light gloves, and still be able to text and play on your phone, play games, and sit and wait. You know, I used to carry binoculars with me, and a lot of people swear by them, but for me, just that motion of coming up and looking around, like Kendall said earlier, keeping your movement still. I've been caught more times, especially during archery season, where you need that animal to come in close. I've been caught more times messing around with my binoculars, so I don't even carry them with me anymore. But since I started hunting with my kids and hunting in the blind, one thing I do take, and there's all kind of varieties of them out there, is some sort of hearing protection. So this is a fairly cheap, under $100 set of hearing protection that amplifies the sound, and I like them because they just stick in, and I can wear my stocking cap over top and still keep warm, and so for me, that's pretty much it. And some PPE. I want to make sure I have gloves with me.
I think it's important to add too, Bob, that you know, thinking about new hunters, and especially maybe youth or smaller stature, but haven't quite got a gun that's comfortable for them yet, that shooting sticks and some way to have a solid rest is pretty helpful as well.
Yeah, and Courtney, jump in anytime, but you know, all kind of other stuff. You know, we talked about scent elimination earlier. There's all kinds of commercial sprays out there, which I do put in. You know, they spray them on your boots, and it'll help keep your scent at least to your standing back. You know, a backpack's pretty handy. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. It doesn't have to be camo. You're just gonna hide it anyway. It's as long as it's still. You know, there's all kinds of different things that you can get for carcass recovery, or you know, your animal recovery sleds. They make a little roll up plastic sheet that you can bring in. There's deer carts, ropes, all kinds of stuff like that. But you know, like Kendall said, trail camera for me too is all this other stuff, lures and calls. If you're hunting the right spot, and those trail cameras really can help you do that. Scouting and trail cameras, they add to your scouting, and me and my kids have them out year round, and you can get a decent model for 60 bucks or so. They've come down in price quite a bit. When I first started using them for work, they were you had to carry a car battery in, and there was two pieces that had to be plugged in with wires, and it was 35 millimeter cameras, and you get 24 pictures and you're done. And if you don't have them set up right, that gets expensive quick.
Bob, actually, quickly, I wanted to ask, what's your most extra piece of gear that you have? Something that you really maybe don't need, but you liked having?
Well, that's a good question. I got a lot of stuff, but I think a deer cart for me. I never used a deer cart. It was always a rope and a drag, but I'm getting a little bit older now, and one of my buddies has one, and man, that's pretty slick. Just has wheels and rolls up and over vegetation pretty quick. So you can get a big deer out of some weird places with a cart that's maybe not be so easy to drag it by yourself.
And for me, I definitely liked Bob's suggestion of the noise canceling earmuffs. My first time using those was a couple years ago on a moose hunt, and it was so neat listening to a moose in the woods raking. We couldn't see him, and he never showed himself, but we could hear him in the woods, and that was really cool. I think being able to hear the animals while still being able to protect your hearing really adds to the experience. To Bob's point, I really like using a four-wheeler to help bring out my deer. So that's definitely a very handy tool. And again, make sure if you have asked for landowner permission and you're hunting on private land, you do need to make a specific ask on, can I use a four-wheeler if I do harvest my deer to drag out my deer? So that's an important thing to include when you're asking for landowner permission. And then of course, making sure you have ropes to go, or if it's not a really good area for a four-wheeler, maybe a jet sled. And again, I really like to use gear from season to season, so it's the same one I use when I go ice fishing.
Thank you, guys. So the next question I have, and we'll be reviewing this a little bit more in next week's panel, which will be addressing the after the shot and carcass care. But Bob, what are some of your knife recommendations for field dressing and butchering, and then also just going over maybe some of the recovery gear that someone might need to be thinking about now?
Sure. You know, I joked with Kendall the other day doing a in-person program, but you don't need the Jack Hawk 9000. I call it the big gut hook, and this thing's like 10 inches long. Certainly, that's not the knife you want to be gutting with and handling your carcass with. For me, my favorite knife, I found this when I was 16, stuck in a tree. It's been reconditioned over the years, but anything small, the important part is it's sharp. And you know, I'm a gear junkie, so I got lots of knives, but this is an outdoor edge swing blade, so it has both a knife blade and a gut hook on the backside. So this is a rounded off portion, so it doesn't get into any of the offal or the inside. So when you're gutting, you can just zip up and not worry about the organs.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of lugging around big knives for sure. A little Swiss Army camper is what I usually use. It's got like a 3-inch drop point blade, and it's got that little saw on it. You know, a nice little hip belt knife is handy too, but something small and innocuous and fairly sharp, that as long as you keep it sharp, and you'd be pretty good. It might be a little different story when you get it back to the house. You might want to, you know, a couple of boning knives that will help you actually process the deer better. But for field dressing and even if you were going to part out an animal in the woods, you can still get by as long as you throw like a drag sharpener or something in with that little Swiss Army camper, which easily fits inside your pocket.
Thank you. So my question is, after going over all the different gear and hearing about all this, it could be a little overwhelming or a little daunting for someone, especially someone new or someone who hasn't really gotten into hunting yet, or they're thinking about getting into hunting. So do you really need all of this gear? Is it absolutely necessary to get started? I mean, what's the bare minimum? What do you absolutely need to get going out into the woods and to be a successful, safe hunter?
Well, I think, you know, if we look back into history, there's been a lot of deer and a lot of game killed over the years before all these new gadgets came out. And so I think, you know, the basic is you need warm clothes to stay warm, a little bit of safety gear, and a knife, and be proficient with whatever weapon you're choosing. And that's the key. And you don't have to go overboard, and you can just start out small. And there's a lot of firearms out there that, you know, they can seem intimidating too, but a lot of the major manufacturers are making rifle and scope combos well under $500 that are pretty good, pretty decent guns. So it's you can get by with just a few items, and can even borrow too.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, keep it simple. Go and find at any local corner store or some of the big name stores a little $5 orange vest and a $2 knit stocking hat. And, you know, if you can borrow a firearm, or if you end up purchasing one, and then keep warm clothes. And then, you know, over time, you might find that there's certain things that you like, and you can adjust then. And don't spend a lot of money getting started unless you really just like to play with gear anyway.
You can also check out some Facebook groups to see what clothing people may be getting rid of or may let you borrow. There's several. There's a female hunter Facebook group. There are just Maine deer hunters, and people. What you've learned very quickly when you start talking to different hunters is everyone is so passionate about what they do, whether it's fishing or it's hunting, and they are always willing to help people get into the sport. So there's definitely some people like Bob who may have a whole bunch of gear that they're not going to be using this season, and they might be happy to let someone borrow. Especially with the pandemic, things are a bit, there is a shortage on some things. So definitely start looking early and don't be afraid to borrow. And again, you don't need hunting specific clothes. You can wear dark colors. You can wear other warm gear that we kind of talked about in the beginning.
I'm going to do a shameless plug for the department's podcast, which is covering first-time hunting stories. Right now, it's called Fishing Game Changers Take Aim. I'll go ahead and post the link to that in the comments as well, so you can hear about other people, how they got into hunting, how they learned about hunting. It's a pretty good series. So for other people who are, another issue for people who are starting to get involved, I mean, actually just for anybody who's interested in hunting or who goes hunting, accessing the laws and learning about hunting laws is an important piece of it. Courtney, do you want to, you are the person who handles updating the law books and making them look good on our website. Do you want to talk a little bit about accessing the laws and where people can find information about that?
Sure, yes. So you can find all the laws at mefishwildlife.com/hunting laws. You can download the PDF and save it right to your phone. That way, if you are somewhere without reception, you still have it saved on your phone and can flip through, or you can kind of search right through on our page. But make sure you download that before you're out of reception, so you can check up any laws. Make sure you take a look at them before you go. That way you have a chance to ask questions if you do have any questions. We also have some PDFs on the right-hand side of the screen under downloads, where we have a PDF that has just the legal hunting hours. And so that's a PDF you can download. I tend to screenshot just the month of November for myself, and I just save that in my photos. That way I always have a legal hunting times available to me. And then there's also a quick reference guide that kind of has some of the more standard laws, I guess you could say, or kind of like a quick reference guide with some important dates for each season. So those are both key. But definitely make sure you save the hunting law book before you're in the woods. That way, if you don't have service, you can still access it. And then also on our website, you can find wildlife management areas, and that's also a nice resource to kind of find some more areas and opportunity to hunt.
Sorry, Courtney, I cut you off. I just wanted to remind people that last week's panel discussion did go over laws and frequently asked questions about deer hunting laws and regulations. You can find that in the YouTube channel for the department. You can listen to some of our department staff talking about frequently asked questions and reviewing some of the important laws that you need to know before going hunting. So if you want just a quick overview, you can watch that YouTube video. Bob, did you want to talk a little bit about landowner relations?
Sure. I think we've touched on some of the points already, but it's important to remember that if any property you go and hunt on, besides our wildlife management areas, there's some state property. It's important to go ask permission. Those things can go a long way. I'm not from Maine originally. I grew up in upstate New York, and I hunted in Maryland and lived there for a while. And the norm in Maryland is posted signs. And so, we have it pretty good here in Maine and in the Northeast with the open door policy on a lot of land. And so to keep it that way, asking permission, find out where they want you to park, what days are best to hunt, those kind of things are very important for landowner relation. And then just remember that if you're hanging trail cameras or tree stands or blind, if you're leaving a blind out permanently, it has to have landowner permission, and that includes on state properties. And so that's an easy thing done. Just contact your regional office, and those folks can get you set up if you're hunting on a wildlife management area with permission for those. But Courtney said it too, if you're planning on recovering using ATV, make sure you get specific permission for that. If you are hunting a place that has a field and you can drive your truck there, make sure that you have permission to drive in the field. Those kind of things go a long way. And then, Kendall's talked about having a little knife to cut vegetation and shooting lanes. And if you're hunting somebody else's property, make sure you get permission for that. cutting vegetation requires permission as well, even if it's just snipping little twigs to get a shooting lane.
It's also important, I think, once you do get that landowner permission, to make sure you thank them, because it is a very generous offer. And I think the best way you can thank a landowner is what Bob just said, is treating the land with respect and respecting all of their wishes. But I think you should go a little bit above and beyond that to show your appreciation. If you do harvest a deer, bring them a package of deer steak if they want it. Offer to cook it for them. And if you don't harvest a deer, maybe you can make them an apple pie. Just show appreciation in a way that's a little personalized. You can also just give them a phone call and tell them about one of your favorite memories that season, or send them a thank you card, especially if you have a youth hunter that you're bringing with you. If you take a picture of your child with their harvest or just in their hunting gear, that's going to make that landowner so appreciative and thankful that you were using their land. It shows them how much it means to Mainers like yourself, and those from maybe away. Another way you can thank them is just offering to help them in the off season. So maybe you help them rake their leaves that fall. Maybe you offer to help them with spring cleanup or anything that they need, just as a way of really showing your appreciation. And then, of course, picking up trash if you see it. And then maybe they're interested in hunting. Maybe they have 50 acres and they don't know how to hunt because they weren't raised around it. Maybe they have a little bit of interest. Maybe they just want to go with you for a day to see what it's all about. Invite them to go out with you, invite them to teach them something. Even if it's a nature walk, kind of teaching them how to look for deer sign, that could be kind of cool. And again, just gives that special thank you.
I think that's excellent, Courtney. And that also, when you said that, makes me think that if you do have trail cameras out there, it might be pretty fun for the landowner for you to share pictures that you get of not just deer, but any other cool wildlife that you picked up on your camera.
Yeah, I think they would really enjoy that. I think a lot of non-hunters enjoy game cameras as their own hobby, just to see what's going on.
Thanks, everyone. So those are all the questions that I have. I'll be turning it over to the audience, but quickly, I want to remind everyone that we do have a panel discussion happening next week, and that will be covering after the shot and carcass care. So kind of really rounding out the experience. We covered scouting, laws. Today we're talking about gear and equipment, and then next week after the shot. So going over everything that you need to be a successful deer hunter. I've really enjoyed doing this series. I've learned a lot too. So it's been really, really good to get together these people from the department and ask them some of our pressing questions. So we don't actually have a whole lot of questions coming in right now. I'll give everyone some time to think about what they'd like to ask. I did have someone ask what Courtney had said as a recommendation for caliber. And I think also, Courtney, if you wanted to take this time just to talk a little bit about your experience with using firearms and getting adjusted, and maybe sometimes that you maybe felt uncomfortable.
So I've used several different guns. To tell a story, my very first year when I was 10, I used a 22 Magnum, which is a caliber that's legal, but it's really not recommended. It is definitely a lower caliber. And it was an 8-point buck, and it literally dropped in its tracks. It was a very quick, ethical kill. And that's because I was so confident in it. I had practiced so much and I had been there. It was a very perfect shot. So again, shot placement, shot placement, shot placement, and that comes from being confident and spending the time to practice. I definitely increased my caliber after that year. And so my favorites have been a 7mm 08 or 243. I've also heard that a 44 Ruger Magnum is another great option that females tend to like. A couple years ago, I started using a 30-06 because I was a sub-permittee for a moose hunt, and I wanted to use something a little higher caliber. And that year, my shot was great. I was very accurate. And then the next year, I kept using the 30-06, and my shots weren't as great. And then the third year of using that gun, my shots were terrible. And I didn't know I was starting to get a little jumpy or scared or not as confident in the gun, but I definitely was. And so I switched to a different gun, a 7mm 08, and I enjoyed hunting so much more because of it, because that gun apparently just wasn't the right fit for me. And at first it was. At first I was confident and I could group my shots very closely and I was very accurate. And just slowly over time, it wasn't the best gun for me anymore. So don't be afraid to take a step back and try something new.
Bob and Kendall, I know that you both have a lot of experience, both very avid deer hunters. While we wait for some questions to roll in, we've got about 10 more minutes. Is there anything that you wanted to add or some advice that you give to people who might be watching who are new, or even who have been at it for a while who haven't been successful? I mean, I think people can go years without actually harvesting a deer and they may get frustrated. Do you have any advice for those folks out there?
Yeah, I'll jump in. And before we get to answering that question, a quick story to sort of go along with Courtney's is that whether you're a female or a youth, I'm 6'3" and 200 pounds, but my father started me out with a single shot 20 gauge with a slug, and that packed quite a wallop. And so it took a while to reverse the bad habits of flinching whenever I shot. And so it's important to find a caliber and a gun that you're comfortable with. But I'd say to answer your question, generally speaking, it's easy to get frustrated, and whether you're experienced or new, and it's really about spending time out there, not just for enjoying it, but it takes time. Even the people, experienced hunters, that often takes a long time to be successful. So just don't stress out over it. You're going to ask yourself a lot of questions, ask other people a lot of questions, and continue to second guess yourself a lot. But keep in mind it's okay to do that. Just don't let that sort of control your enjoyment of the process. So be patient, keep learning, and you'll never stop learning, and just keep a good attitude about it. Because the easiest thing to cause failure in hunting is to get frustrated and worried about it, when reality is it's not a quick instant thing.
Yeah, and I would echo that. Manage your expectations. There's a lot of areas in Maine that have low deer numbers, and so if you're even preseason scouting, deer habits change as the season goes, and so you may just not have experience, have a interaction with deer that year. But for me, it's a pretty therapeutic to sit out there, be in the woods, listen to what's going on, hear the blue jays call, and it's a pretty good centering exercise for me. So I just like being out there. And if you manage your expectations, and I would also say for new hunters that taking that animal's life is a pretty emotional experience, and going back with confidence. And if you have an animal that comes in and it's within your range and you get it in your scope and you just don't feel ready, don't feel pressured to take it. There's more to success with hunting than just harvesting game. So that's my advice, is just to manage your expectations.
So I just have a question that came in from the audience. The question is, any advice for new hunters trying to find hunting ammo this season? Shelves are empty everywhere. This is a problem that we've been hearing about. Bob, I know that you have been looking for things and mentioned this earlier in the conversation. Do you have any advice?
My advice is to go back early and go back often to your stores. A lot of the a lot of your local stores can order stuff in, but they're even having trouble. If you go to our website, and on the non-lead page, there's a list of places, online retailers that sell non-lead options, but they also sell lead options. So at this point, you may have to take what you can get, but and a lot of those have, even though they're sold out, have notify me buttons. And so that's how I've been able to get some. I just click on that and they'll shoot you an email when it comes in. But make sure you check that email frequently, because I've been looking for 10mm ammo, and I will check my emails in the evenings, and oftentimes by the time I get there, they're gone.
I'd go down to a local corner store and cozy up with somebody with a coffee and see if they got some extra rounds in the closet. Maybe they'll loan you.
I like that suggestion. Another important thing as we head into the season is, even if you don't harvest a deer or any species that you're ever hunting, it doesn't mean you didn't have a successful season. If you enjoyed yourself, if you made good memories, if you learned something, I think I'd consider that a successful season. So whether you harvest an animal or not, it's still an awesome season. I think some of my favorite hunting seasons have been times where I didn't harvest a deer. I remember a certain season a couple years ago, a deer kept coming out of my range and it never really gave me a shot that I wanted to take. But I learned so much watching that deer in its natural habitat without it knowing that I was there. I learned a lot just from watching it. And I really liked that hunting season. I learned so much that year, and I did not get a deer. And another thing, back to our beginning of the panel discussion, we talked about staying warm. When I am layering or choosing my layers, I like to have ones that are full zips. So probably my first layer that's normally like a pullover wicking, I either have a 3/4 zip, and then I normally have a fleece on top of that that's normally a full zip. That way, when I'm walking into the woods in the afternoon, I can leave them unzipped. And as it kind of starts to cool down, once I sit down, I'm no longer moving, and I may not be sweating anymore. I zip it up, and then it keeps me warmer. And then same thing in the morning. If when you get there at when it's first legal shooting time, you're going to be dressed a little warmer than when you are. Say you're sitting out there until 10. Now the sun's out. Now you want to unzip maybe one of your base layers. So I definitely recommend zippers, and not ones that are loud. You can probably find some that or just zip really slowly so you aren't making as much noise.
That's a great tip, Courtney. One thing it made me think of was, if I was going to spend a little bit of money on clothing, it would really be on good rain gear, because that's helpful. It extends your hunting. I prefer hunting in the rain, where a lot of people don't like it, but it also is a good layer for cold weather clothing too, and it saves a little money just by adding it on top of a nice wool jacket or something like that.
And so why do you enjoy hunting in the rain?
Excuse me. It tends to me to be a little quieter. It's easier to sneak around. Usually the rains in the falls come with the wind, and people generally hate the rain and the wind, but there's less people out there. It's easier to stalk and still hunt. And I tend to think that the deer come out a little earlier, because it's, although they move in all weather, they, in my experience, tend to show themselves a little earlier in the evening or later in the morning when it's miserable weather like that. And when they are bedded down, it's a little easier to get closer to them. So.
And if you're not going to be moving around like Kendall is, it is important to have a space or a spot that you like to go to if it is raining. Making sure you might have like a little umbrella that you add to your tree stand, or maybe you have like a little shack that you hunt from, or some sort of cover that you can use, because as we know, time is a huge barrier for people getting into the woods. So if it rains 2 Saturdays and you only get to hunt on Saturdays because you hunt Monday through Friday, that's pretty disappointing. So planning ahead to make sure you have your rain spot or your rain gear is really important to making sure you can get out there comfortably.
Thanks, everyone. So we don't really have any other questions coming in, and we only have a couple minutes left. There are 15 people watching, and only a couple questions came in. So I guess maybe you all did a really good job anticipating what hunters out there might be wondering about when it comes to gear and equipment. So I'll go ahead, unless a question comes in while I'm wrapping up. I'll thank all of our panelists for joining me today. I think this was a really great conversation. Really appreciate everyone giving their advice and filling everyone in on their tips when it comes to hunting gear. Any final thoughts from the panelists before I sign us off?
Yeah, I think I'll just echo what we've said in the last part, wrapping it up. Just get out there and enjoy Maine's outdoors. That's the important part.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great, oh, Courtney, go ahead.
So this piece of advice is going to be very different from the rest of the advice we've heard today. So I have long hair, and hair definitely absorbs a lot of smell. So I definitely try to pull my hair back underneath my hat, and then probably underneath my jacket, because whenever I go somewhere and it's very smelly, like if I am in a kitchen where people are cooking bacon, I can definitely smell it most of my hair. So just making sure, if you do have long hair, hiding that's definitely something that absorbs a lot of scent. And I don't know, that's my own theory.
That is not something I would have thought about. So that is great. Thank you very much. We did get a few thank yous from the people watching that they're enjoying this series. So I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And thank you to all my panelists. I think this has been a great conversation. Have a good Monday and a good week.